Good morning, friends. As the folk saying goes, if you speak for the wolf, speak against him as well. Where did this wolf tribe appear from among our people? Does it really stem from our own roots, our own blood? It is our own. And just so we don't go around flaunting too proudly the white mantle of the just, let everyone ask himself, if my life had turned out differently, might I myself not have become just such an executioner? It is a dreadful question if one really answers it honestly. I remember my third year at the university in the fall of 1938. We young men of the Komsomol were summoned before the district Komsomol committee not once but twice. Scarcely bothering to ask our consent, they shoved an application form at us. You've had enough physics, mathematics, and chemistry. It's more important to your country for you to enter the NKVD school. That's the way it always is. It isn't just some person who needs you. It is always your motherland. And it is always some official or other who speaks on behalf of your motherland and who knows what she needs. 1 year before, the district committee had conducted a drive among us to recruit candidates for the Air Force schools. We avoided getting involved that time, too, because we didn't want to leave the university. But we didn't sidestep recruitment then as stubbornly as we did this time. 25 years later, we could think, well, yes, we understood the sort of arrests that were being made at the time, and the fact that they were torturing people in prisons, and the slime they were trying to drag us into. But it isn't true. After all, the Black Marias were going through the streets at night, and we were the same young people who were parading with banners during the day. How could we know anything about those arrests, and why should we think about them? All the provincial leaders had been removed, but as far as we were concerned, it didn't matter. 2 or 3 professors had been arrested, but after all, they hadn't been our dancing partners, and it might even be easier to pass our exams as a result. 20-year-olds, we marched in the ranks of those born in the year the revolutions took place. And because we were the same age as the revolution, the brightest of futures lay ahead. It would be hard to identify the exact source of that inner intuition, not founded on rational argument, which prompted our refusal to enter the NKVD schools. It certainly didn't derive from the lectures on historical materialism we listened to. It was clear from them that the struggle against the internal enemy was a crucial battlefront, and to share in it was an honorable task. Our decision even ran counter to our material interests. At that time, the provincial university we attended could not promise us anything more than the chance to teach in a rural school in a remote area for miserly wages. The NKVD school dangled before us special rations and double or triple pay. Our feelings could not be put into words, and even if we had found the words, fear would have prevented our speaking them aloud to one another. It was not our minds that resisted, but something inside our breasts. People can shout at you from all sides, "You must!" and your own head can also be saying, "You must!" But inside your breast there is a sense of revulsion, repudiation. I don't want to. It makes me feel sick. Do what you want without me. I want no part of it. This came from very far back, quite likely as far back as Lermontov, from those decades of Russian life when, frankly and openly, there was no worse and no more vile branch of the service for a decent person than that of the gendarmerie. No, it went back even further. Without even knowing it ourselves, we were ransomed by the small change in copper that was left from the golden coins that our great-grandfathers had expended, at a time when morality was not considered relative, and when the distinction between good and evil was very simply perceived by the heart. Still, some of us were recruited at that time, and I think that if they had really put the pressure on, they could have broken everybody's resistance. So I would like to imagine, if by the time war broke out I had already been wearing the NKVD officer's insignia on my blue tabs, what would I have become? Nowadays, of course, I can console myself by saying that my heart wouldn't have stood it, that I would have objected and at some point slammed the door. But later, lying on a prison bunk, I began to look back over my actual career as an officer, and I was horrified. I did not move in one stride from being a student worn out by mathematics to officer's rank. Before becoming an officer, I spent a half a year as a downtrodden soldier, and one might think it would have gotten through my thick skull what it was always like to obey people who were perhaps not worthy of your obedience, and to do it on a hungry stomach to boot. Then for another half-year they tore me to pieces in officer candidate school, so I ought to have grasped once and for all the bitterness of service as a rank-and-file soldier, and remembered how my hide froze and how it was flayed from my body. But did I? Not at all. For consolation, they pinned 2 little stars on my shoulder boards, and then a third, and then a fourth. And I forgot every bit of what it had been like. Had I at least kept my students' love of freedom. But you see, we had never had any such thing. Instead, we loved forming up, we loved marches. I remember very well that right after officer candidate school, I experienced the happiness of simplification, of being a military man, and not having to think things through, the happiness of being immersed in the life everyone else lived, that was accepted in our military milieu, the happiness of forgetting some of the spiritual subtleties inculcated since childhood. We were constantly hungry in that school, and kept looking around to see where we could grab an extra bite. And we watched one another enviously to see who was the cleverest. But most of all, we were afraid we wouldn't manage to stay in until the time came to graduate and receive our officers' insignia. They sent those who failed to the battle for Stalingrad. And they trained us like young beasts, so as to infuriate us to the point where we would later want to take it out on someone else. We never got enough sleep because after taps, as punishment, we might be forced to go through a drill alone under the eyes of a sergeant. Or the entire squad might be routed out at night and made to form up because of one uncleaned boot. There he is, the bastard, and he'll keep on cleaning it, and until he gets a shine on it, you're all going to stay standing there. In passionate anticipation of those insignia, we developed a tiger-like stride and a metallic voice of command. Then the officers' stars were fastened on our tabs, and only 1 month later, forming up my battery in the rear, I ordered a careless soldier named Burbaniev to march up and down after taps under the eyes of my insubordinate Sergeant Metlin. And do you know, I had forgotten all about it until now. I honestly forgot about it for years. Only now, seated in front of the sheet of paper, have I remembered. Some elderly colonel, who was an inspector, happened to be there, and he called me in and put me to shame, and this after I left the university, tried to justify my actions on the grounds that it was what we had been taught in school. In other words, I meant, what humane views can there be, given the fact that we are in the army? And the more so in the organs. Pride grows in the human heart like lard on a pig. I tossed out orders to my subordinates, and I would not allow them to question, convinced that no orders could be wiser, even at the front, where one might have thought death made equals of us all. My power soon convinced me that I was a superior human being. Seated there, I heard them out as they stood at attention. I interrupted them. I issued commands. I addressed fathers and grandfathers with the familiar, downgrading form of address, while they, of course, addressed me formally. I sent them out to repair wires under shell fire so that my superiors would not reproach me. Andreyation died that way. I ate my officer's ration of butter with rolls, without giving a thought as to why I had a right to it, and why the rank-and-file soldiers did not. I, of course, had a personal servant assigned to me, in polite terms, an orderly, whom I badgered one way or another and ordered to look after my person and prepare my meals separately from the soldiers. After all, the Lubyanka interrogators don't have orderlies. That's one thing you can't say about them. I forced my soldiers to put their backs into it and dig me a special dugout at every new bivouac, and to haul the heaviest beams to support it, so that I should be as comfortable and safe as possible. And wait a minute, yes, my battery always had a guardhouse too. What kind of guardhouse could there be in the woods? It was a pit, of course, although a better one than those at the Gorokovets division camps which I have described, because it had a roof, and the man confined got a soldier's ration. Vyshkov was imprisoned there for losing his horse, and Popkov for maltreating his carbine. Yes, just a moment, I can remember more. They sewed me a map case out of German hide, not human, but from a car seat. But I didn't have a strap for it, and I was unhappy about it. Then all of a sudden they saw some partisan commissar from the local district party committee wearing just the right kind of strap, and they took it away from him. We are the army. We have seniority. Remember Sachinko, the security officer who stole a map case and a dispatch case. Finally, I coveted that scarlet box, and I remember how they took it away and got it for me. That's what shoulder boards do to a human being. And where have all the exhortations of grandmother standing before an icon gone, and where the young pioneer's daydreams of future sacred equality. And at the moment when my life was turned upside down, and the smirched officers at the brigade command point tore off those cursed shoulder boards and took my belt away and shoved me along to their automobile, I was pierced to the quick by worrying how, in my stripped and sorry state, I was going to make my way through the telephone operator's room. The rank and file must not see me in that condition. The day after my arrest, my march of penance began. The most recent catch was always sent from the Army Counterintelligence Center to the Counterintelligence Headquarters of the front. They herded us on foot from Osterode to Brodnica. When they had led me out of the punishment cell, there were already 7 prisoners there in three and a half pairs, standing with their backs to me. 6 of them had well-worn Russian army overcoats, which had been around for a long time, and on their backs had been painted in indelible white paint, SU, meaning Soviet Union. I already knew that mark, having seen it more than once on the backs of our Russian POWs as they wandered sadly and guiltily toward the army that was approaching to free them. They had been freed, but there was no shared happiness in that liberation. Their compatriots glowered at them, even more grimly than at the Germans, and as soon as they crossed the front lines, they were arrested and imprisoned. The 7th prisoner was a German civilian in a black 3-piece suit, a black overcoat, and a black hat. He was over 50, tall, well-groomed, and his white face had been nurtured on gentleman's food. I completed the 4th, and the tater sergeant, chief of the convoy, gestured to me to pick up my sealed suitcase, which stood off to one side. It contained my officer's equipment, as well as all the papers which had been seized as evidence when I was arrested. What did he mean, carry my suitcase? He, a sergeant, wanted me, an officer, to pick up my suitcase and carry it, a large, heavy object, despite the new regulations, while beside me 6 men from the ranks would be marching empty-handed, and 1 representative of a conquered nation. I did not express this whole complex set of ideas to the sergeant. I merely said, "I'm an officer. Let the German carry it." None of the prisoners turned around at my words. Turning around was forbidden. Only my mate and the 4th pair, also an SU, looked at me in astonishment. When he had been captured, our army wasn't yet like that. But the sergeant from counterintelligence was not surprised. Even though I was not, of course, an officer in his eyes, still his indoctrination and mine coincided. He summoned the innocent German and ordered him to carry the suitcase. It was just as well the latter had not understood our conversation. The rest of us put our hands behind our backs. The former POWs did not have even 1 bag among them. They had left the motherland with empty hands, and that is exactly how they returned to her. So our column marched off, 4 pairs in file. We did not converse with our convoy. It was absolutely forbidden to talk among ourselves, whether on the march, during a halt, or at overnight stops. As accused prisoners, we were required to move as though separated by invisible partitions, as though suffocated, each in his own solitary confinement cell. The early spring weather was changeable. At times a thin mist hung in the air, and even on the firm highway the liquid mud squelched dismally beneath our boots. At times the heavens cleared, and the soft yellow sun, still uncertain of its talent, warmed the already thawing hillocks and showed us with perfect clarity the world we were about to leave. At times a hostile squall flew to the attack and tore from the black clouds a snow that was not really even white, which beat icily on faces and backs and feet, soaking through our overcoats and our footcloths. 6 backs ahead of me, 6 constant backs. There was more than enough time to examine and re-examine the crooked, hideous brands SU and the shiny black cloth on the German's back. There was more than enough time to reconsider my former life and to comprehend my present one. But I couldn't. I had been smashed in the head with an oak club, but I still didn't comprehend. 6 backs. There was neither approval nor condemnation in their swing. The German soon tired. He shifted the suitcase from hand to hand, grabbed at his heart, made signs to the convoy that he couldn't carry it any further. At that point, his neighbor in the pair, a POW, who only a little while before had experienced God knows what in German captivity, but perhaps mercy too, took the suitcase of his own free will and carried it. After that, the other POWs carried it in turn, also without being ordered to, and then the German again, all but me, and no one said a word to me. At one point we met a long string of empty carts. The drivers studied us with interest, and some of them jumped up to full height on top of the carts and stared. I understood very quickly that their stares and their malice were directed toward me. I was very sharply set off from the others. My coat was new, long and cut to fit my figure snugly. My tabs had not yet been torn off, and in the filtered sunlight my buttons, also not cut off, burned with the glitter of cheap gold. It was easy to see I was an officer, and with a look of newness, too, and newly taken into custody. Perhaps this very fall from the heights stimulated them and gave them pleasure, suggesting some gleam of justice, but more likely they could not get it into their heads, stuffed with political indoctrination, that one of their own company commanders could be arrested in this way, and they all decided unanimously I had come from the other side. Aha, the Vlasov bastard got caught, did he? Shoot the rat. They were vehement in their rear-line wrath. The most intense patriotism always flourishes in the rear, and they added a good deal more in mother oaths. They had regarded me as some kind of international operator who had nonetheless been caught, and as a result the advance at the front would move along faster and the war would come to an end sooner. How was I to answer them? I was forbidden to utter a single word, and I would have had to explain my entire life to each and every one of them. What could I do to make them understand that I was not a spy, a saboteur, that I was their friend, that it was because of them that I was here? I smiled. Looking up at them, I smiled at them from a column of prisoners under escort, but my bared teeth seemed to them the worst kind of mockery, and they shook their fist and bellowed insults at me even more violently than before. I smiled in pride that I had been arrested not for stealing, nor treason, nor desertion, but because I had discovered through my power of reasoning the evil secrets of Stalin. I smiled at the thought that I wanted, and might still be able, to effect some small remedies and changes in our Russian way of life. But all that time my suitcase was being carried by others, and I didn't even feel remorseful about it. And if my neighbor, whose sunken cheeks were already covered with a soft 2-week growth of beard, and whose eyes were filled to overflowing with suffering and knowledge, had then and there reproached me in the clearest of clear Russian words for having disgraced the honor of a prisoner by appealing to the convoy for help, and had accused me of haughtiness, of setting myself above the rest of them, I would not have understood him. I simply would not have understood what he was talking about. I was an officer. And if 7 of us had to die on the way, and the 8th could have been saved by the convoy, what was to keep me from crying out, "Sergeant, save me, I am an officer"? And that's what an officer is, even when his shoulder boards aren't blue. And if they are blue? If he had been indoctrinated to believe that even among other officers he is the salt of the earth, and that he knows more than others and is entrusted with more responsibility than others, and that consequently it is his duty to force a prisoner's head between his legs and then to shove him like that into a pipe, why shouldn't he? I credited myself with unselfish dedication, but meanwhile I had been thoroughly prepared to be an executioner, and if I had gotten into the NKVD school under Yezov, maybe I would have matured just in time for Beria. So let the reader who expects this book to be a political expose slam its cover shut right now. If only it were all so simple. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? During the life of any heart, this line keeps changing place. Sometimes it is squeezed one way by exuberant evil, and sometimes it shifts to allow enough space for good to flourish. One and the same human being is, at various ages, under various circumstances, a totally different human being. At times he is close to being a devil, at times to sainthood. But his name doesn't change, and to that name we ascribe the whole lot, good and evil. Socrates taught us, know thyself. Confronted by the pit into which we are about to toss those who have done us harm, we halt, stricken dumb. It is, after all, only because of the way things worked out that they were the executioners and we weren't. If Malyuta Skuratov had summoned us, we too probably would have done our work well. From good to evil is one quaver, says the proverb, and correspondingly from evil to good. From the moment when our society was convulsed by the reminder of those illegalities and tortures, we began on all sides to explain, to write, to protest. Good people were there too, meaning in the NKVD MGB. We know which good people they were talking about, but were the ones who whispered to the old Bolsheviks, "Don't weaken," or even sneaked a sandwich into them, and who kicked all the rest around wherever they found them. But weren't there also some who rose above the party, who were good in a general human sense? Broadly speaking, they should not have been there. The organs avoided employing such people, eliminating them at the recruitment stage, and such people played their hand shrewdly so as to get out of it. Whoever got in by mistake either adjusted to the milieu or else was thrown out, or eased out, or even fell across the rails himself. Still, there were no good people. Were there no good people left there? Have a good day, friends.